Hi Booktube, this is Kelly. Thank you so much for watching Books I'm Not Reading. I'm doing a review today and these are the most challenging videos for me to do. I do apologize, I've got a lot of notes here that I'm going to be looking at, but I am here today to review John McPhee's Rising from the Plains. And I have a lot to say, so we're just gonna dive right in. This is my springathon book to read some nature writing, and it's also part of my Curious Adventure TBR, and this one is for the prompt about reading about a local celebrity or a local specialty. I chose the rocks of Wyoming. So a little bit about John McPhee. He was born in 1931. He's written a ton of books about all kinds of things. This book, along with 4 other books, were compiled into one called Annals of the Former World, and that won the Pulitzer Prize for nonfiction in 1999, I believe. I really wanted to read this one though because it's about the state I live in, and so. This book, John McPhee is spending time and traveling around Wyoming with geologist David Love. David Love lived from 1913 to 2002. This book was published in 1986. He got his bachelor's and his master's degree at the University of Wyoming, and then for his PhD went to Yale, where he said fieldwork experience was a little bit different than his, because he grew up in Wyoming and he grew up around rocks and rock formations and had a lot of time, as he says, like in the saddle to be thinking about the rocks of Wyoming. He did work for Shell, which is I believe an oil company, from 1938 to 42. And then he worked for the United States Geological Survey from 1942 to 1987. He is, and I don't know if this is still true or not, but he's the only the second person in American history to complete 2 separate geologic maps of an entire region. So he wrote about Wyoming in 1955 and 1985. So right before this came out. And he kind of represents in this book, I feel like, sort of a dying breed of geologists who actually go out in the field and spend a lot of time in the field and look at things, whereas all of these new technologies that have emerged were emerging at that time and have continued to go on to do that, like where people are in a lab or people are just studying, a sample of something rather than really spending time being on site and looking at the rocks. I loved this book. I really wanted to give it 5 stars, but the last portion of the book was really quite challenging. So I would recommend this book to anyone who really loves geology, and I would also recommend this book to people who have been to Wyoming. I really think you need to, the things I enjoyed the most about this book were the places that I have seen, that I have experienced, and some of them that has been a very, very long time. I was a very little girl the last time I was in the only time I was in Yellowstone National Park. So if you're not familiar with what the state looks like, then that would be, I think, a really difficult. The other thing that I am concerned about with this book is that it was published in 1986, so I don't know what new discoveries have been made or what's changed since then. I wish I had an updated version of it, but John McPhee is 89, so probably not going to happen. There were some really intense technological parts of the book, or things that I could have used a map or something, a glossary. I don't know. I needed some more tools to fully understand and appreciate what John McPhee was trying to do this. Now, why did I love the book? Rocks have played just a huge part in my life. And I know that it sounds strange, but here in Wyoming, you can't really go anywhere and ignore the geography of the place that you're in. It's always kind of a factor. It's always around, and I love rocks. I used to dig rocks in the alley with one of my friends. I don't know what we thought we were going to find in the alley behind my house, but we spent a ton of time. I remember having boxes of rocks in my bedroom growing up, and I also loved dinosaurs as well. I just wanted to show you. This is more something that you would buy from a rock shop, and I'm sure that's where I got this beautiful, look at that beautiful agate. I don't know that this was from Wyoming necessarily. There's lots of rock shops though, and I've been to several of them. Another thing, and again, this is the kind of rock I think I probably did actually find, because it's not as perfect as you would expect to find from a rock shop. And I don't know if you can see like the lines in there, but there's clearly like this was part of a shell, or maybe multiple shells together that turned into, you know, millions of years ago, turned into stone. Even the shape of it, the back of it, you can see lines as well. And then here, this is, and again, my hunch is that I found this, but I could be wrong. I don't remember. So this is a piece of petrified wood, and look how you can really tell like that it was part of a tree just based on the inside. You can't see the rings, unfortunately. That would be really cool. And then there's the outside of it. So what kind of tree must that have been? And I love that. And then here's a picture of this. That is the piece of petrified wood that I grew up with in my backyard. And I have since done some research and found out that it's a petrified stump from that somebody in my family picked up and hauled, don't ask me how, from, again, central Wyoming, the Shirley Basin, which is the one place in Wyoming where there is so much open space that it is borderline terrifying. But I grew up with that in my backyard. So, like I said, rocks were just, they were just a big part of my life. And this book helped kind of remind me of that and rekindle that. I asked my mom about the stump, and I asked her to send me a picture, and she was telling me about, that her side of the family collected it sometime in the 1930s. So we've had it for quite a while. Every period in the history of the world is represented in Wyoming. How cool is that? So there were lots of times where John McPhee would make a remark like, in one camera shot, you could capture 2,600 million years of history, which is just mind-blowing, right? And there are things that are billions of years old here. So, so John McPhee and David Love traveled to these different places in Wyoming, primarily places where you can see, he calls them road cuts. And so some of them are man-made, some of them not so much, but just places where a hill or a mountain is somehow, for whatever reason, kind of sliced open, and you can see all of the layers of rock in them. And there's at least 2 of these between here and where my family lives, where Jason's family lives. And David Love is he is a really interesting, fascinating person. I mean, yes, he worked for Shell. He's the person who discovered uranium in Wyoming. And I guess that's one of the other things, is that David Love, I think, would consider himself this book consider himself an environmentalist. He also understands the need for resources. So one of the things that makes Wyoming special is also what funds our whole state, and what causes constantly a boom and bust cycle, is that our state is extremely rich in oil, in coal, in other kind of minerals. Trona, you may not be familiar with. My parents own a piece of trona. Don't ask me why. I don't understand. Uranium, natural gas, and so that has changed the landscape of Wyoming as well. And it's one of the things Jason and I really wrestle with. Definitely opposed to fracking. And I won't go into what all that is, and that isn't even touched on in this book. I'm not even sure that technology was possible in 1986. I doubt it. But he's still so while David Love considers himself an environmentalist, he also is he would prefer to find resources other than where he does. But he's a scientist above all, and so he lost a lot of friends. He went through Yellowstone National Park and found oil, I believe oil in the park, which people said was impossible, and he found it. He would like that to have found that oil someplace else, but the scientist in him is always searching, is always looking, is always questioning. And even theories about like plate tectonics and hot spots, he challenges them. Wyoming is so unusual because, for one thing, we have a variety of mountains. I'll try to show you a little map here of Wyoming. Our mountains don't all go in the same direction. So they're not all north-south. And so that can't just mean that two plates came together and pushed up the Rockies, or at least Wyoming's portion of the Rockies. He also said that they said in this book, like, they're kind of spaced out. Why are they so far apart? And so, David Love really questions these kinds of things, and I love that about him, that he's willing to do that, even at the risk of challenging other people's theories. But Wyoming has been an ocean at one point. It's been a swamp with dinosaurs. It's been covered with rivers. It's been shaped by water as well as wind. There have been volcanoes, earthquakes. There was a volcano that they think, that scientists at this time thought was about 600,000 years ago. And at the Continental Divide runs along this part of the country, and it's what separates where rivers go. So whether rivers end up winding their way to the Pacific Ocean, or whether they end up winding their way to the Atlantic Ocean, or I guess the Gulf maybe. At the Continental Divide, in one part, they found ash that was 60 feet thick from this volcano that happened like 600,000 years ago, which is pretty recent in geologic time. So yeah, it's just a really interesting book. And again, I can't express to you how much I loved reading about the places that I'm familiar with, that I know about. And I did appreciate the other parts. It makes me actually want to get in the car if we were traveling right now, and go and see some of these things again. One of the parts in the book, I remember, they're talking about what's called the Big Hollow, which is west of Laramie, where the University of Wyoming is, and it's in the southern part of the state. And I remember I remember us driving by that, and my grandmother and my mother talking about what a special thing it really was. And I don't know if I can find, oh yeah, here it is. So we had seen a mile or two away a hole in the ground 11 miles long, 4 miles wide, and deeper than the Yellow Sea. There were some puddles in it, but it did not happen to intersect with any kind of aquifer, and basically it was dry. With a talent for understatement, the people of Laramie call it the Big Hollow. Geologists call it a deflation basin, a wind-scoured basin, or, more succinctly, a blowout. The wind at the Big Hollow, after finding its way into some weak... It's a geology term here. Cretaceous... No, that's not right. Cretaceous... Excuse me. I don't know how to say it. Shales had, in short order, dug out 4 million acre feet and blown it all away. Wind not only makes such basins, but maintains them, usually within the frameworks of resistant rock. And it was just so cool. I was like, I remember us driving by that and them talking about it. And talking about what, how that makes that part of the state different and unique. So anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. But I did enjoy this book. I felt like it could have benefited from some maps, some charts, other than the one I showed you. And, but I really appreciated John McPhee seeing the specialness in Wyoming and writing about it. So that is my Springathon book. Booktube, remember to be kind to yourself, be kind to others, stay safe, and be well. I will talk to you soon.